guys, it's Caroline, and today I'm going to be doing a December wrap-up. I'm going to try to go through these books as quickly as possible because there are 15 of them, and you know, nobody's got time for all that. So I'm just going to get right on into it. First up is Luster by Raven Leilani. Now, I gave this book 4 stars. I think that I would kind of call it like Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams, but a little bit raunchier. I really enjoyed the writing style. I thought it was funny and poignant. I enjoyed the discussion of like being a young 20-something person out in the world, finding your place. I think my one thing that docked it from a 5-star to a 4-star is you have to suspend your belief a little bit, because the premise is 20-year-old is having an affair with an older married man, and he sort of says, oh, I have this open relationship, and she ends up living with his wife and their adopted daughter. And I just think, like, I don't know, I don't care if I'm this wife in the open relationship. I'm not offering the mistress like to come stay. But anyway, besides that, I do think it was interesting and I'm glad that I read it. Next up is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this because this was my most disappointing or my worst book that I read in December, and so you can check that video out if you want to hear my full thoughts. But basically, I just thought it was pretty bland and I didn't find the main character at all compelling, and I just didn't care about what the end reveal was, and I think that's kind of a problem because that book's whole shtick is, oh, look at this cool place, look at this like cool possible reveal. So I think it failed in that regards, and I gave that 2 stars. Next up was Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. I gave this 4 stars. I think that my biggest gripe with it is that the synopsis literally tells you what's happening like all the way till the end. Part of that's because this book is really short, but I didn't appreciate that it did that. However, the good news is that the synopsis was interesting. Basically, it's about a bunch of people who go on this like university sponsored trip. Most of them are students, but one group is this family where the dad is really interested in how people lived way back when. And so they try to act like authentically based on how people like back in the Stone Ages might have acted. And it's an interesting look on sort of gender roles and how they have changed and how we today look back on history. I think it discussed a lot of interesting topics and was done very well. I also think that despite its brevity, the brevity really worked in its favor rather than against. I think this one actually like hit the mark on the length it was supposed to be. Next up is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. Now, I also really enjoyed this one. I think that it brings up a lot of interesting discussion about gender roles, both just in general and in Asia where this takes place. I also think it talks about like the role of women in capitalism and sort of the expectations we put on women when they should be working, when they should be focusing on family, when they should be going out and trying to make a family. I think it was really interesting. The main character is somehow completely unrelatable and like almost you can't even tap into her because she just seems like such a non-person that you would actually know in real life, and yet I found myself really sympathizing with her. I just think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, and I think again, that was another book that really took its length and did good things with that. So I appreciated that. Then I read The Friend by Sigrid Nunez, and I gave that 4 stars. This is what Joan Didion's A Year of Magical Thinking wishes it could be. This is just a look on what it's like to lose a friend. In theory, this is a book about a woman, a writer, who loses another friend, a writer, although this is this man who's had many marriages and she probably has had feelings for many, many years but never acted on them. And his current wife, the one he was living with when he killed himself, they have this really big dog, and she's like, I never wanted this dog, I don't want this dog now, and so she gives it to the main character, and so this main character is taking care of this dog. She lives in an apartment that doesn't allow dogs, and she's also working through her grief for her best friend, who is also someone that she had come to love but never like got to act on it, and he did commit suicide, so that complicates things. And it's just moving, it's thoughtful, it's funny, it's like everything you could want, and it's hard to describe, but it's really, really touching and interesting and captivated me the whole way through, and I'm really glad that I read it. Then I read Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. Now, Skyward was the first physical book I finished. All those other ones were audiobooks, and that whole time I was working my way through Skyward. Now, Skyward is a YA science fiction. I previously have only read Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, so I kind of thought he would go easy on us and not kill everyone in sight, but no, this man killed some children. And it hurt. It hurt. This man will not hold punches. I'm starting to see the pattern of Brandon Sanderson where he builds this world. It's a really well-built world. And then towards the end, he'll do something that completely shakes the foundation of the worlds in the system, whether it's the magic or, you know, what the characters believe. And the characters themselves don't know it. And it like changes their worldview as well. And I just think that's fascinating and interesting and so hard to pull off in many regards. It feels really organic because you understand why the characters were in the dark just like you were. It doesn't feel gimmicky. And it was great. I think my only complaint is it's like gets slightly didactic because our main character is dealing with the idea of her being a coward versus what it means to like save your own life versus being cowardly. But otherwise, I really enjoyed that book, and I can't wait to pick up the sequel soon. Then it was A Very Punchable Face by Colin Jost, which was a wild ride. I always kind of saw him as like a vanilla guy, but he's wild. So first of all, I really enjoyed it because he went to Harvard just like I did, and he was actually a part of the Lampoon. I wrote for The Crimson, which is the newspaper, and the Lampoon is sort of the notoriously, they put out a funny magazine every year. And the Crimson and the Lampoon are constantly pranking one another, whether that's stealing stuff. Like one time the Lampoon took the Crimson's like very old and ornate chair that's very special to the Crimson and invited Donald Trump pretending to be the Crimson and let him sit in it, and took pictures and pretended like it was the newspaper writing a piece endorsing Donald Trump. And Donald Trump fell for it and like came. Anyway, so he was a part of that. So it's kind of funny because I'm like, you're one of those, Colin. But it was fun to hear about his time at Harvard since I had just left there this past year. And then he has a whole chapter about how his mom was a first responder in 9/11, which I found really touching and well written. And I was like crying in the shower while listening to it, which I was not expecting after I was just hearing about like Lampoon jokes. And for the most part, he's very funny. He poops himself like as an adult once a year or so for whatever reason, which I found wild. My only complaint is I wish there was more about Scarlett Johansson because I just like cannot imagine them together as a couple, especially the more I learned about him. I really now can't imagine them together. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of him, which is, you know, a sign of possibly a good memoir. Next up is Transcendent Kingdom. Now, I understand why this book is so hyped. I think it does a really great job with what it's trying to do. It's a meditation on mental illness, but as well as science and religion. It's about a first-generation immigrant woman who is getting her PhD, and she's studying addiction. Her brother died of a drug overdose, and her mother is suffering from depression, and she grew up in a really religious household, and she's trying to sort of balance these two ideas, particularly because her immigrant mother doesn't really believe in this concept of mental illness, doesn't think it's for people like them. And I just think it was really a good look. And as someone who comes from the South, which is predominantly religious, I think it does give due diligence to both sides and understands why people find and seek solace in religion, while also like pointing out the important parts and the contradictions and where religion fails certain people and how science can sort of help, but it also shows how science doesn't have as much of a hopeful air that sometimes religion can bring. My biggest complaint is the final 2 pages just absolutely ruin the essence of this book. This is not really a spoiler, but it almost has this like end happily ever after 10 years into the future type thing, which I think is really gimmicky. It just made it feel weird. Next up was 9 Perfect Strangers by Leanne Moriarty, and this was bizarre. I was not expecting this at all. So it is a thriller. It's by the same woman who wrote Big Little Lies, and while it does kind of have similar vibes, it also is just completely off the rails. It's about a group of people, I guess 9 of them, which was also weird because I really only heard about 8 of them, and then like we were 100 pages in, and then they're like, and the 9th person, and I was like, whoomst? They all go to this health retreat, they have to put away their phones, they're like these weird smoothies, blah, blah, blah. Basically, halfway through, this is kind of a spoiler, so skip 30 seconds if you don't want it, but they find out that the head woman, who's a little bit nutso, is microdosing them on LSD, and they find out because she's like actually real dosing them on LSD to get sort of a therapeutic experience and to work through some stuff. It just goes off the rail from there because I'm like, how did this woman not get in so much trouble? There's like acid tripping and these people with all their problems, and I was over it. And then it had like 7 endings because every single character, like I felt like the ending was here and then I had to just keep reading because every single character had to have their like moment after they leave. They had to have their own chapter. What did they do? How did they move on? Whatever. And I was just like, I just don't care. I don't need all of this. There's too many characters that need wrapping up. Like this could have been, you could have cut the number of characters in half and it would have been like the same story. And I gave this 2.5 stars. Next up was The Oracle Year by Charles Soule. I might be saying that completely wrong. Also, a lot of these books are very shiny. But anyway, this is a book I've been looking forward to. For whatever reason, 2019 me thought this is so important and made this one of the 10 books I wanted to read in 2020. Which is bizarre because this book is interesting and fun, but was in no way like anything that knocked my socks off. It's about a man who in the middle of the night just like wakes up and he suddenly knows like 108 random prophecies. He kind of tests them out. They turn out to be true. So he posts several of them online. He becomes known as the Oracle. It's this whole thing. The CIA and the president want to get in touch with him. Everyone's like, who is this guy? And it really affects him psychologically because like on one hand, he's selling it to like the highest bidder and these banks who want to like predict the future because they know about, you know, this crop shortage. He also worries that like he's not saving lives or he could be saving lives and he's choosing not to by withholding information. It really like messes with this dude's head. I mean, this book was fun and exciting. There's like spies and chasing and, you know, online stuff. Like the dialogue was really wooden and you kind of saw where it was all going to end up, even if you didn't know the mechanics of it all. And it didn't feel as thought through as it should have been. It felt a little bit like the author was like, trust me, this was very smart and these are smart people doing smart coding things, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay, but can you actually do that coding? So I feel like the author kind of didn't know what he was talking about, but like just was betting on us also not knowing like what he was talking about, which is never great. But I mean, it was fun. I had a good time. I'm just not like pressing this into anyone's hands anytime soon. Next up is Vox by Christine Doucher. Now, this is another book that is completely just meh. I'm giving it 3 stars. It is sort of Handmaid's Tale-esque in the sense that it's about a world or an America where women can only speak 100 words per day. They have these little wristbands on, and once they reach over 100 words, they start getting shocked. And this woman is like a neurolinguistics PhD, and she had just, right before it all went to shit, she had just come up with a certain like serum that if you have a stroke and you have trouble with language processing, this like helps you recover from that. First of all, everything was like, it made me so mad because it's this like ultra conservative Christian world where women are oppressed, and it just like, I was so angry hearing about it, which, you know, that's what it's supposed to do. But then this was another one where the science just felt so fake, which maybe I'm wrong and this is just on me because the author of the book is actually like a neurolinguistics PhD or something of the sort at like from Georgetown, like actually studies this stuff. But it just sounded so fake that you could like put this serum directly into someone's brain and you could fix someone who cannot process language and is saying words but they just like don't line up into sentences. It's just a jumble, and like suddenly give them this serum and within 5 minutes they're just talking in coherent sentences again like nothing ever happened. Like I just don't know that the brain works like that, and I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. A single intro psychology course tells me otherwise. And that was my problem, is just the end fell off the rails. There was guns, there was shooting, you know, putting serum in people's brains, and I just felt a little bit like, you know, this seems so fake. Next up is A Rogue of One's Own by Evie Dunmore. I gave this 3 stars. This is the second. It's the sequel to Bringing Down the Duke. It's a historical romance. It's basically a series about these 4 women, each of which is a suffragette, and it's like romance. Now, these are just sexier than I keep remembering them to be, and so I was really kind of like, whoa, with all the sex. I thought it was cute. It was fine. At first I wasn't really digging the romance, which was bad because it's basically just about the romance, but then I started going for it. So it all turned out fine in the end. Again, it's not something that I was loving. I probably will continue with the series, although I'm not even really sold on that. So we'll see. Next up is Wondersmith by Jessica Townsend. I gave this 4.5 stars. My mom and I listened to this audiobook together. We absolutely adored it. This is the second in the Nevermore series, which is about a girl who is cursed, and on her birthday she gets whisked away to this magical place called Nevermore, where she has to compete in a competition in order to stay. This is just so wonderful. It's middle grade, but the plot is still fairly complex and intriguing, and I think that the world itself is so amazing and just whimsical and fun and heartwarming, but not to say there's not like scarier or more intense parts. Like, it's not just kids frolicking, like there's an actual complex plot. I would say this is similar to Harry Potter, not in the problematic way, but in the idea that it's just such a fleshed out world with so many different characters that you care about, that it's just so easy to fall into the world. And there's a lot of scenes that include magic or world that isn't important to the main plot, but just make you feel like, yes, this is why I read this book. I love it. I couldn't recommend it enough. I don't care what age you are. Okay, next up is The New Wilderness. Now, this was shortlisted for the Booker, and I really enjoyed it. I would say that this is similar to The Road by Cormac McCarthy, except for instead of looking at fatherhood and sonhood, it looks specifically at motherhood and daughterhood. It is about a mother who goes with her boyfriend / husband, I can't remember, and her daughter, because her daughter living in the city is becoming really sick, coughing up blood, and they start this project where they go into what's called the wilderness and live with a set group of people, and they sort of are this nomadic people who are looked over by these people called the Rangers. Basically, it's a dystopian where, like, pollution's gotten really heckin' bad, and some people are allowed to go to, like, the final, like, frontier of untouched land, and it's just about them roaming around and the people and stuff they come into contact with, but also what it's like to be a mother and sacrifice for your own child, be a child and know that your mother has sacrificed so much for you, growing up and making your own decisions. There's just a lot going on, and I think it's really interesting. Spoiler alert, this is going to be my favorite book of December, so check out that video if you haven't already. But These Violent Delights is a 1920 Shanghai Romeo and Juliet retelling that has paranormal aspects. That's a lot. There's a lot going on, and boy, does it pull it off. There's 2 separate gangs, and one of them are sort of like ex-Russians who have emigrated because of communism, and the other gang are, people who are native to Shanghai, and, there's like communists coming in, which both of these gangs don't want anything to do with. There's a sickness that is paranormal in nature that is plaguing everyone, but the Romeo and Juliet's parents, who are, gang leaders in their own right, don't really have time to be messing with this plague, this pandemic, because they're worried about the politics of Shanghai with all the European foreign influences, as well as the rise of Chinese communism. There's a lot of politics, there's a lot of just like tension and yearning and like love and darkness, and there's a trans character who just gets to like live her life and be a character. It's which I really think we could use more of in all sorts of literature. There are also just wonderful familial relationships. There's also bad familial relationships, but it really captures the heart of Romeo and Juliet while completely putting it's just completely different. It was so good. And the fact that this girl is a year younger than me and goes to Penn, where I almost went, and at the last minute decided to go to Harvard, and I'm like, wow, she could have just been my friend. Like, I could have known her. We studied the same thing. And what have I done with my life? Nothing. I'm sitting in my room. But this girl's out here writing this. And there's a cliffhanger at the end of this, and this is a duology, and I'm dying. I can't believe I read that. Like, I never read books a month after they're published, especially if there's a sequel. And I did it, and I played myself. That's all I got. This is kind of a long one, but oh well. Bye.